And with one press of one button, here we are. Hello and welcome to episode 50 of Shelf Analysis. I have no idea how we managed to make it through 50 of these things. We started off this series at the very beginning of first lockdown at the tail end of March. And by everybody's standards, there's no way I should still be here talking to incredible authors about their current books and about books that they love as well. Here, 50 episodes on. But here we are. This one is a bonus episode. It is a special episode for our 50th. And normally I would be giving you some information and an introduction as to who our author is and our guest is going to be. There are certain people that you talk to for whom they genuinely do need no introduction, and that's not a made-up phrase. So if I press this button, hopefully I can say, hello, John Banville, how are you?
I'm very well. Hello.
Welcome to Shelf Analysis. Tell me, firstly, maybe a little bit about, because it's I suppose the raison d'etre behind this series, how the last 7-8 months have been for you as a writer. Personally, how have you dealt with 2020 so far?
Well, I'm afraid writers have an unfair advantage in that we spend our lives in isolation. So this is nothing new for me. In fact, Tom Stoppard said recently that he'd been waiting all his life for this. Nowhere to go, nobody to see, just sit in a room and work all day long. It's pure bliss. So I feel very guilty about that.
You haven't experienced any of the same symptoms that have beset some of the other authors I've spoken to who found themselves grinding to a halt?
No, goodness no. No, this is ideal. When you've nowhere to go and nothing to do. I had an experience like this a few years ago in Chicago, and I was teaching at the university there, and I was living on campus. And the campus of the University of Chicago has nothing. No restaurants, no bars, no cinemas, no anything. So again, I just sat and worked all day long, which was blissful. And it was one of those exquisite Indian summers that you get in the autumn in America sometimes, and so it's absolutely beautiful. And on the day I left, at the end of November, I think, there was a blizzard. So they wrote to me and said, "Please come back. Please come back." You obviously brought the weather.
In terms of conducting interviews like this as well, because obviously you have a new book out now, and normally for most authors that means there are festivals, it means there are public interviews. In terms of conducting those in this form or this fashion, how do you feel about that?
Well, I hate to see myself on screen. But it's always a terrible shock because, one is 35. And suddenly the screen tells you that you're a little bit older than that. But also, I just don't like seeing myself. But I'm very happy not to be traveling. I am absolutely terrified. I've had a lifelong terror of air travel. Makes me sick with fear to get onto an airplane. And I'm contemplating the prospect that I may never have to get on an airplane again. So it's delightful.
Has that been something then you've always had to endure as a writer as opposed to enjoy?
Some festivals are fun. Most are a chore. It's all right now. It used to be the publisher sent you on reading tours. I remember doing a reading tour in America in which I visited 10 cities in 9 days. And one of the publishers gave me advice and said, write the name of the town that you're in on a piece of paper so that when you wake up in the morning, you'll be able to look at it and say, I'm in Chicago, I'm in Pennsylvania, whatever. But they don't do that anymore. Which is a blessing. Also because I detest hearing the sound of my own voice, and I hate having to go back and read my books. So now it's just it's these Zoom things. They're unreal. I don't feel real. You don't feel real to me. But of course, it's dangerous because I feel like say anything.
In theory, that could happen. You could say potentially anything in these things. I'm going to ask you about the new book, given that it seems like the right thing to do. The book is Snow. It's been out since the beginning of the month. Maybe just for those people who haven't read it, tell us a little bit about the new book.
Isn't that a wonderful cover?
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's set in the mid-50s in a small town in Ireland, probably in Wexford. And a priest is murdered at the start of it. And the investigation is conducted by a detective with the wonderful name of St. John Strafford. He's a son of the Ascendancy, which of course is an absolute impossibility for the mid-1950s in Ireland. But wonderful thing about being a novelist is you can do anything you like. So he goes down to this big house where the priest was found murdered, and he encounters all kinds of dark deeds, dark secrets, skeletons in many family cupboards. I had fun doing it. The first line of the main narrative is the body in the libraries. The body is in the library, said the Colonel, come this way. So you think you're going to be in Agatha Christie land, but as it goes on, you find you're not.
In previous times, this is the sort of book that you would have published under your pseudonym, Benjamin Black. But I've seen you say elsewhere that it looks like you've finally killed him off for good. Why?
I killed him off. Well, I was writing a sequel to one of the Benjamin Black books, and I had to go back and look at the book. And I really loathe reading my own stuff. All I see are the flaws and the failures. So I hit on the idea of listening to them on audiobooks, which I did. And the wonderful Timothy Dalton, who's a marvelous reader. Everybody sniggers at him for being a bad James Bond, but I would have thought that was a mark of distinction in an actor. And he reads them, and he just does a beautiful, beautiful job on it. And because I'm an insomniac, I listen to them at night, in the middle of the night in the dark. And this wonderful Welsh voice, he didn't try to cover up his Welsh accent at all. He just read them naturally. And because he was performing them, I couldn't be distanced from them. And I was able to listen to the book. And I thought, that's not bad at all. Why am I hiding behind this ridiculous pseudonym? So I decided to kill off Benjamin Black. So he's gone.
What I'm interested in about the format of how we do this here, where we have authors come on and pick books that they themselves love and that they think other people should read, is you're obviously always so highly critical of your own work. I want to see what it is that you love, and those things that you think we really should be reading, considering old, new, it doesn't matter. So tell me where you're going to start with your choices.
Well, yeah, I'm going to start with an easy one. A French writer, I suppose you could say he's a crime writer, but he's not really. But certainly it's noir fiction. Pascal Garnier. And the one I've chosen is House of Pain, which I think is a masterpiece. The story is of Simon, is a hitman. He's old and he's dying. And he's going south to do his last job, his last hit. On the way, he meets an irrepressibly innocent young man called Bernard. And he hires him to drive him to the south. And in fact, it's a sort of road book, has a road movie. But it's also a sort of love story, because these two odd characters do love each other in a way. Now, the book is very, very dark indeed. But it's also hilariously funny. All of Garnier's books are pitch black, but wonderfully humorous. And he's a very fine writer. I mean, there's a description of a murder in an aquarium, which is, I think, a marvelous set piece. And along the way, these two characters, they pick up an unmarried mother and her baby. And the baby, his baby is 6 months old or something. But it's one of the main characters in the book. I don't know how he does it. This little girl is absolutely vivid. So it's a splendid book, and it's quickly read. But I guarantee you that when you finish it, you'd start it again immediately. Also, it'd make a wonderful movie. I hope to do a script for it someday.
I was thinking it sounds almost like a Bertrand Blier film from the 1970s. It has that kind of air about it.
It is. I suspect that he probably made some of Garnier's movies in France. But it is, yes, wonderfully vivid and wonderfully pictorial. You can see it, you can taste it, you can smell it. What more can you ask of a novel? It's also thrilling. in the way that he executes it. It's like a chess, like reading a chess game. It's the moves are perfect.
And just remind us of the title of that again. It's Pascal Gagné. And
How's the Pain? It's by Pascal Gagné. And I recommend it very highly indeed.
Okay. What's your second choice?
Well, now we get to... I would pick Yeats' collected poems. Yeats, I think, the older I get, the more I appreciate Yeats. I think he was... I mean, it's invidious to make these comparisons, but I make these claims, but I think he was the greatest poet, certainly in the 20th century, and one of the great poets of all time. I've always admired him. People always tell me I'm influenced by Beckett and Joyce and Nabokov and so on, but I'm much more influenced by Yeats. I love the daring of his rhetoric. I love his arrogance and his precision. I love his imagery. And I love that. Now I'm talking really about late Yeats, the early stuff, I think Twilight stuff. I don't much like, but as he got older, he got harder and the language becomes pared down. It's almost a monosyllabic poetry, and yet the power of it is extraordinary. And if I may, I just read a tiny bit from Byzantium.
Please do.
Which I think is a greater poem than Sailing to Byzantium. But just listen to the music of this. Listen to the harsh music of this. At midnight on the emperor's pavement flit flames that no faggot feeds, nor steel has lit, nor storm disturbs, flames begotten of flame, where blood begotten spirits come, and all complexities of fury leave, dying into a dance, an agony of trance, an agony of flame that cannot singe the sleeve. I mean, there's no point in trying to make sense of it. It's word music. I mean, it does make a kind of sense, but not. I mean, I always think that the essence of poetry, the essence of a good poem should be that you cannot translate it into another form. You cannot give an account of it. The poem is itself, and it exists for itself. It has no relevance outside itself. And this great poem certainly fits that definition.
It's one of,
and it's these late. And in their humor, I mean, Yeats had a great advantage as an artist, and he's totally lacking a sense of humor. It's very difficult to be a great man if you have a sense of humor, and even worse if you have a sense of the ridiculous. It's very hard to be a great man. Yeats, as they say, was lucky to be humorous. But there is a kind of, again, I keep coming back to that word harsh. There's a kind of harsh humor, a harsh, mocking voice in these late poems that I find irresistible.
It's one of those threads that I think I've noticed through the space of now 50 of these interviews is the amount of authors recommending poetry and the amount of people talking about how maybe they're turning to poetry more throughout the course of the last 7-8 months because they've been finding it hard to read long form fiction. They've been talking about novellas in the same way as well. Do you think that's has that happened to you in terms of your reading over the last 6 or 7 months? Has that been affected?
Oh no, I've always read more poetry than anything else, really. I read poetry, I read philosophy, I read memoir, biography, letters, not much fiction, which is a pity. I remember when I was young, I read an essay by George Steiner, which began by saying, "Old men do not read fiction." I was outraged by this. But now that I'm old, I realize the truth of it. There is something in fiction that one doesn't seem to need when one gets past about the age of 60. I'm not sure what it is. Perhaps it's the element of the bedtime story. One is a child, really, until one gets to about 60. One becomes a different kind of child after that. But perhaps that's it. But I don't read a great deal of fiction, but I read a lot of poetry.
It's a fantastic suggestion for your second book. What's going to be number 3?
Well, you mentioned novellas, and this is the only piece of fiction that I've chosen, which is Henry James's The Turn of the Screw. The Title Screw is a novella, which James was rather ashamed of. He sort of potboiler, saying dashed off to make money. But he's wrong. It's, first of all, a great work of art. Secondly, it is the greatest ghost story ever written. And thirdly, it's wonderful in its ambiguity. James himself described the story as a trap for the unwary. And when I read it first when I was young, when I was a teenager, I took it at face value as a ghost story. And then I read it later on, and I noticed that in the story, nobody sees the ghosts except the governess. The story is a governess, young woman, untried in the world, clergyman's daughter. She's hired by a rich man to look after 2 orphan children at a big house in the country, Bly. And the house itself is one of the characters in the book, I think. And she goes there and she starts seeing these ghosts of Miss Jessel, her predecessor, and Quint, the master's valet, who are dead. And she becomes convinced that they are seeking to possess the souls of the 2 little children, Miles and Flora, who are the absolute quintessence of niceness, Victorian niceness. They're 2 little darlings, But somebody once said to James, "How much evil am I supposed to read into this story?" And James said, "All that you can imagine, dear boy, all that you can imagine." So Quint and Miss Jessel were lovers. They're possessing the souls of this tiny brother and sister. So one wonders, what are the tiny brother and sister up to? But nobody sees the ghosts except the governess. She's never named. And it ends tragically. And when you read it a second time or a third time, you begin to understand that it's in fact a study of hysteria, that there are no ghosts, that it's the governess imposing her sick mind on the situation she finds herself in. So I'm going to read it again. Just when I picked it up, I thought, God, I must read that again, even though I read it about 6 months ago. It's endlessly fascinating. And it's the beginning of Henry James's late period. So the style is dense, but very clear. And the insights are superb. He out-Freuds Freud. Not that I'm a Freudian, but the psychological depth is extraordinary. So I would recommend it highly. It's a marvelous book, and especially in these times when everybody's locked up in their houses and probably being susceptible to ghostly imaginings. And it's also a wonderful Christmas story because the framing device is that it's a story told by a man in a club at Christmas time to his friends. It's a book to curl up with, but it will also frighten the socks off you.
And you can't ask for more than that, particularly at this time of year. As you said, you're not the first person to recommend Henry James. He's been recommended different books 3 or 4 times over the course of the series, which is nice to see.
I think he is the greatest novelist. I mean, nobody greater than him.
Okay, where else are we going after that?
Well, let's see. I'm going to do more poetry. Elizabeth Bishop is one of the great American poets of the 20th century. She was overshadowed by her friend Robert Lowell, because A, he was a man, and B, I suppose he is a greater poet. I mean, that's debatable. He certainly struck a greater pose. Elizabeth Bishop is wonderfully warm, and funny, and unassuming. But the music of her poetry is superb. And again, I'm going to read a short little poem. It takes a minute or two. It's called The Sandpiper. It's a little bird. The roaring alongside he takes for granted, and that every so often the world is bound to shake. He runs to the south, cynical, awkward, in a state of controlled panic, a student of Blake. The beach hisses like fat. On his left, a sheet of interrupting water comes and goes, and it glazes over his dark and brittle feet. He runs straight through it, watching his toes, watching rather the spaces of sand between them, where, no detail too small, the Atlantic drains rapidly backwards and downwards. As he runs, he stares at the dragging grains. The world is a mist, and then the world is minute and vast and clear. The tide is higher or lower. He couldn't tell you which. His beak is focused, he is preoccupied, looking for something. Poor bird, he is obsessed. The millions of grains are black, white, tan, and grey, mixed with quartz grains, rose, and amethyst. Isn't that a beautiful poem? Doesn't that cheer you up?
It cheered me up when I found out my 16-year-old daughter was going to be studying her for her leaving cert, and I thought things have certainly changed for the better.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. I didn't know that. That's wonderful. But it's those poems are a delight, and try to get a nice Farrar Straus edition, the American edition, and you can get wonderful thing about. I mean, I hate this internet and all that stuff, but it's wonderful for buying secondhand books. I mean, not the internet, but these two, what's it called? Twitter, and Facebook and all these things. Absolutely loathe them. I think they're destroying the world. Even though somebody has there is a Twitter account in my name,
and he's quite funny. I mean, I never believe he's you, but
yeah, my children show me bits of it now and then when he does something particularly funny, and it doesn't seem to be malicious. So I'm quite flattered, really. But the way I was talking about the internet, the great thing about it is you can buy secondhand books all over the world, and you're supporting small independent bookshops. You know, you order a book and it will come from Tasmania or the wilds of northern Canada or somewhere, and you know you can buy them for a few dollars. The postage is always 3 times as much as the book costs the book. But it's delight, and they always come in brown paper packages. Many of them are tied up with string. So look for that book. That one.
Yeah, that's the one. I think particularly at the moment for those of us who can't wander around secondhand bookstores and can't browse and can't travel in order to browse around exotic secondhand bookstores. You're right. That's sometimes the only way to go is find them online and buy from them.
Yeah, I mean the latest thing I bought was. 2-volume edition of the Letters of Robert Louis Stevenson, 1899 and 1902. I bought one on one bookshop site, the other on another bookshop site, and they matched. They're perfectly matched, and they're an absolute thrill and a delight. And you're a child again. Gifts, presents are coming. The postman is bringing you a present. And as I say, the cost is negligible, unless you're a book collector and you want to buy, spotless first editions and so on. But if you want just ordinary books to read, and the old books are so beautifully made, the paper in them is so good, the binding is so good, and they're so beautiful. And as we know, few man-made objects are more beautiful than the book. The book is one of our great inventions. Beautiful thing to hold in your hand. There used to be a little thing on YouTube, I think, where there's a monk in the Dark Ages sitting at his desk, and he has in front of him a book, and he didn't know what to do with it. He'd never seen a book before, so he has to call technical help. So the technical help monk comes, and he says, I don't know what to do with this. And he says, well, you open it like this, and goes, it opens. Yes, it opens. And it has all this information stored inside it, and you can even put some of your own information in the margins and so on. And then he turns it over and leaves it. And he says, "No, you able to work it?" I says, "Yes." Technical monk goes and I tries to, but he's trying the back of the spine. He says, "Come back! I can't open it." Which is exactly that name with computer.
Yeah, we all need a technical help monk sometimes. Yeah, that happens to all of us. Where are we in terms of your choices? Do we have a couple more left, or?
there was a reason to mention Stevenson, because I'm reading at the moment Kidnapped, which I read every now and then. It's a wonderful book. When I was a little boy, I read it as an adventure yarn. When you read it now, you see the darkness in it. It's, as Henry James is talking about Turner Screw, there's a lot of evil in this book. These are very wicked people. And Long John Silver, who is one of the great characters, he's a very wicked man indeed. There's a point when they're besieging the stockade, and he says to the people, he says, "Them as dies will be the lucky ones." You play with that. And yet at the end, he almost seduces Jim Hawkins into liking him again. So, the devil has the best tunes. The devil is a great seducer. But I've chosen Stevenson's essays. Go and read Kidnapped and go and read Treasure Island. But the essays are... Now, look, when I was young, they were on the syllabus, so of course we hated them. But going back to them in when one has grown up, they are so beautiful. They're so beautifully done. And Stevenson, who's, well, I have no agreement with his notions of art and what fiction should be and so on, but I just love him. I love him as a person. In the letters, he is an absolute delight. And in the essays, he is, and he writes so beautifully. I'm going to quote a tiny piece from an early essay called Ordered South. He was tubercular, and frequently he would be told to go to the south of France to recover. And this is a little bit where he's talking about the beauty of the landscape down there. And he just says, he's talking about olive trees. And he says, and then there's no end to the infinite variety of the olive yards themselves. Even the color is indeterminate and continually shifting. Now you would say it was green, now gray, now blue. Now tree stands above tree like cloud on cloud, massed into filmy indistinctness. And now at the wind's will, the whole sea of foliage is shaken and broken up with little momentary silverings and shadows. Isn't that beautiful?
Lovely.
He catches the landscape so well. And he's so wise and so funny and so down to earth. He's the most down to earth literary artist that I know of. And I really recommend these essays. They're invigorating, they are cheering, and you keep standing back from them saying, this is written by a man who knew he was condemned to death, who knew that he didn't have long to live. But the genuine cheerfulness, I mean, he's not cheerful in an annoying way, people are. He's just cheerful and funny, and he bucks you up. You emerge from these, not laughing, but smiling. They're wonderful. And as I say, wonderfully sustaining. So, Stevenson's essays.
Okay. And do we have one more, or are we?
Yeah, I'm going to do one more poetry book. I don't know how many people read Rainer Maria Rilke anymore. Very great German poet in the early years of the 20th century. He's a bit precious. He's a bit sort of spats and white gloves man, but he had this extraordinary experience. His friend, the Princess von Thun und Taxis, lent him her castle at Duino, near Trieste in Italy. And he went there to stay, to work. And one night he went out this is a story he tells, and let's choose to believe it. One night he was walking on the battlements in a storm, and he just heard this line in his head. Who, if I cried, would hear me among the angelic orders? And over the next few weeks, he wrote 9 long poems, 9 Duino elegies, which are ravishingly beautiful. Because he wrote them so quickly, they're amazingly exciting. You can feel the urgency and the drive of a poet really inspired. Now, I don't know what inspiration is, but if ever anybody was inspired, Rilke was. Having done the elegies, he sat back and then he wrote the Sonnets to Orpheus, which is a book-length collection of sonnets. Wrote them incredibly fast, and they are exquisite as well. And I'll just read a bit from my favorite of the Duino elegies, which is the 9th. And he's saying, you know, since life is so fleeting and, it's all over so quickly, why bother to live at all? And he gives a wonderful answer. He says, because being here is much, and because all this that's here, so fleeting, seems to require us and strangely concerns us, the most fleeting of all. Isn't that beautiful? These are wonderful, wonderful poems. People might be daunted by them because, German poetry, words you think don't sit very well together, which of course is wrong. The greatest poets over the years have been German. In fact, he was Czech. He was born in Prague, but he wrote in German, so the Germans have annexed him as one of theirs. And these translations they're pretty old, the ones that I like. They're by J.B. Leishman and Stephen Spender. They cooperated in producing this. And it's a bit creaky, but it's the translation that I read these in first, so it's still the one I like best. They may be a little bit inaccurate and maybe a bit woozy, but I think they're beautiful. So get the Duino elegies, and then get the Sonnets to Orpheus. Again, they're exquisite. Erect no monument to his name, for this is Orpheus. Oh, it's just beautiful, beautiful poetry. I mean, one good thing about poetry is you could sing it to yourself, like pop songs, You're walking your dog on the beach and you could declaim Yeats or Rilke, Elizabeth Bishop to the waves. Hard to do with prose. Although some prose has its own dark, slightly awkward music.
I think that's an image of you that we'd like to finish on, which is you walking somewhere on a beach with a dog exclaiming Yeats out loud for a couple of minutes. I think that's a lovely way to finish.
Baffling the poor dog.
Are you working on something at the moment?
I'm always working on something. Yes. Yeah. I'm doing a book that I started. Oh my goodness, about 4 years ago, and I may finish it in the spring. It has a very catchy title, which is The Singularities.
That's a fantastically catchy title.
Yeah, irresistible. It's a strange book. I don't understand it, but then I don't want to understand it. Freddie Montgomery, the murderer in the Book of Evidence, is released from jail, and he wanders into the strange alternative world that I invented for my novel, The Infinities. So I'm bringing back all my characters, all my circus animals. I suspect this will be the last book that I write like this. I write other kinds of books, but I think this will be the last. Because apart from this, it's so bloody difficult. Every morning I sit down. I say this always, nobody believes me, but it's true. Every morning I sit down in front of the page and I think, I don't know how to do this. I just do not know how to do this. I don't know how I did it yesterday or the day before. I'm incapable of doing this. And I scratch down a few words and I push them around and I add a few adjectives, and gradually I realize I'm working. I'm getting something done. But it's a very slow process. Yesterday I spent my whole working day doing one paragraph. And I know it's wrong. I know there are faults and the words are all there, but I'm sure they're not in quite the right order. But this is what I do. This is what I've been doing for the past 60 years. And what else would I be doing?
I think sometimes your willingness to admit that can be an inspiration for other authors much earlier in their career who are probably feeling the same thing, and they think, well, if it happens to John Banville, then it can happen to me.
Emerson has a wonderful a wonderful sentence where he says, young men sit in libraries and worry about Goethe and Schiller and Shakespeare. They forget that Goethe and Schiller and Shakespeare were themselves young men in libraries once. And the downside of it is that it doesn't get easier. People say to me, you've been doing it for 60 years, surely it must be easier. I say, no. But what's the good of something being easy?
Yeah. And that's the moment we will finish on. John Banville, it has been an absolute joy talking to you, and thank you so much for taking the time out from your working day and from creating that single paragraph to tell us of some of the books that you love and those extraordinary suggestions. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And that's it for episode 50 of Shelf Analysis. Thank you so much for joining me. We will have another new episode for you live next Wednesday night at 8 p.m. as you'll usually find Shelf Analysis, this time with the author of Leonard and a Hungry Paul, Ronan Hession, is going to be my guest next Wednesday night. Other than that, thank you so much for joining me for this, and see you again soon.